God. It's really a struggle. It's something that just kind of wears us down, right? All that stuff, that's what we look like. Internally, that's kind of what we look like. We're trying to figure out how we can do life and do it effectively and do it the way that also brings a lot of honor and dignity to God in how we do the things that we do. And the fact is that when we begin to not make room for God, we ended up being some things that we don't really want to do and being people we really don't want to be. And so we're kind of trying to deal with that and trying to do things in our personal lives we can be consistent with what God needs us to be. I think our lives in today's society is kind of depicted in the cartoon, the next cartoon, that one. I mean, it's a real struggle, I think, more than ever, because we're so pulled in so many directions that I think that church or religion or faith or God, whatever you want to term that, has become something that we just kind of compartmentalized. It's just something that we do on Sundays. And then the rest of the week, we just try to manage the best that we can, going from one place to the next, doing the things that everyone expects us to do, and that we don't have time to do the things that God needs us to do. We do the things that are not necessarily necessary. And we don't do the things that really impact other people's lives, like trying to help those who live their life without hope, which encompasses about 90% of our society. And so that's pretty hard. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And if you have some questions, it's a great time to ask some questions on some of the things we've been doing. One of the things we've always talked about in the middle of the sanctuary, the stage up here, is this chair. It is a prayer chair. Everything that we do has to center around prayer. And prayer is just not just a time we sit down and give God our wish list and then move on to our happy days and just get mad at God if God doesn't fulfill that wish. That's what we have parents for, right? We don't do that with God. And so prayer kind of is just our time that we can sit with God on a daily basis or whenever we've had that urge, just to be quiet, just to be silent. You hear that? That's what silence is. Where the only noise that we hear is what goes on between our ears. That list. Things we got to do. Because we've been so conditioned, right, in our society that if we're not being useful, if we're not doing something, we're not being what we're supposed to be. And so we're always used to moving, going, blowing, doing everything we do, get caught up, then we get ahead. But getting ahead never happens, does it? So it just gives us more things to do. So we're constantly trying to just stop here and just for a moment and just be quiet as he possibly can to be with God. Very important to learn how to listen to the voice of God in our lives. The busier we become, the more important this becomes, that we can learn how to do this. So, you don't have to say a word. You just have to be still and listen. But the funny thing is that when you start this process, you're going to learn how difficult silence is because there's a lot of stuff that's going to creep up even during the course of the day to be more aware of. And one of them are represented in these boxes below me underneath this cross. So inside these boxes, y'all have made a list of all the things that you worry about that drives you nuts. Something you're always constantly going, oh, my kids, oh, this is going to happen, oh, I'm going to do my job. Things we always worry about. We also have another box that consists of all of our resentments, all those things in our past that prevents us from living in the today or living in the future. Always affects us. Those things that happen to us that we just can't seem to get over. It just drives us crazy. In the box we have all the things all the people in our lives that we really struggle to forgive. Make a list of those. Those folks that just seem like to be a burden to us, and we just can't seem to move forward. Always grinding us. Every time that name comes up, the hair on the back of our neck stands out. You know that. And the other box we have down here is our fears, all those things that prevents us from doing the very things that God asks us to do in our lives. All those things that prevent us from moving forward. Because I think sometimes we know the answer, we're just too afraid to do it, right? I'm in a bad relationship, but I need to stay in it because I'm afraid of being alone. I'm in a bad job, and I'm afraid not to do it because I rely on that paycheck. I'm in a bad this or a bad that, or I need to know do this, but I don't know how to get there. And so we kind of get stuck in where we are, and that makes us a people that we don't necessarily want to be. So all of these things, these boxes, we carry around with us. All of them. And so if you can imagine carrying all these boxes every single day of our lives and how try to function within our lives, it just doesn't work. And so we put up some props up here for you. One is the chair for our prayer. The second one we had was a worry box. Anybody get a worry box? Nope. Well, you can't have mine. This is mine. Now, this is a good box to get. I'm telling you, if you sit down in your prayer chair and time just be quiet with God and those things that you worry about, if you really just took the time to write down those worries, and then write down why it bothers you, why you worry about it, and just get it all out there, and then you put it in your box and you close it and give it to God. Because when the course of the day, when you're running around and doing stuff, you think, oh my gosh, that worry starts to come up, you'll remember this simple little act. And you'll say, oh, I gave that to God. And I'm not going to worry about it today. You also have to remember that it takes about 21 days in a row to make a habit. So if you do this one day and you close the box and you go back to your merry business and say, well, I tried, it didn't work. Right? That's what I said about losing my sarcasm. It didn't work. But I practice that 21 times a day, so it is a big habit. Amen. Finally get an amen. So those are things that we need to work on, be constantly being aware of, so it becomes a habit, something that we need to do, and before you do it, before you know it, all of a sudden you don't worry near as much, and you're freeing yourself up to do the things that matter. Another thing we did was this resentment. A lot of folks carry around a lot of resentment. And you know who they are because they show themselves all the time. But what we did on these resentments, you write these down, things in your past that you just can't seem to get over. People have hurt you in your past, things in your past that didn't go the way you wanted to, churches in the past that hurt you, that's keeping you from doing the things that you need God to do. Write those down, put it in your urn or your barbecue pit, and just light that sucker up. Move past it. If it's there the next day, do the same thing. If it's there the next day, do the same thing. 21 days, if you have to create a new habit and move past that resentment, okay? Today we have another one we're going to work on. And it doesn't get any easier, folks. And I'll see if you can figure out what it is through this reading. Then Peter came and he said to Jesus, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? 7 times? Jesus said, not even close, not 7 times, but I tell you, 70 times 7. Not you're supposed to keep track, you're supposed to do that. Here's this reading. Thank you. If y'all have those envelopes in your chair, you will be using these today. So hold on to them. If you don't have one, we have some up here. You're in luck. Not only do you get to use the envelopes up here, but you get better seats. Or none. No takers. Yeah. Before we move into the act of forgiveness, I'm wondering if there's some questions y'all might have had dealing with the chair, the worries, or the resentments. Anybody have any questions if you're trying to do that, or what that might look like, or things that you're trying to do that doesn't seem to work very well? Anybody have any questions? None, huh? You want to explain it? Okay, bigger urn? Okay. Yeah, we can do it. We can do that. If you do, just let me know. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the act of forgiveness and why that is so incredibly important to us. And I'm going to take it on a really deep level, so I want you to kind of follow along with me, because one of the greatest joys, and I say joy, not the things that necessarily that bring a lot of joy to me, is the the things I get to do is I work with a lot of people who are at the end of their life. And they're trying to make that transition from this life to the next. And being able to be with them and work with them and all the stuff that takes place at the end of life is really something that I find a lot of joy in doing. One of the greatest gifts that we don't recognize is a gift that God has given us to have this great ability to reconcile with people. That is something that a lot of us just hold back and will not do because we just have so much either resentment or anger, and all that just kind of leaks out. A lot of it because of our inability to want to forgive. But that is one of the greatest gifts we have been given, is that time for us to learn how to forgive other people, to reconcile relationships. And I want you to think about it this way. What organization do you know in the history of this world says that the most important thing that you can do is to reconcile? Politics comes to mind, right? They're all about reconciling, right? We know all that. Yeah. Little League, that's another one. They're always trying to look out for one another. What other organizations do we have? There's none. That if we can say, what's one word that we are called to do as a people of God? What is the one thing that God expects us to do, wants us to do, needs us to do to represent God's kingdom? And that is to build and build up relationships with each other. If something's broke, what do? We work to reconcile. We work to try to connect it. If we do not do that, if we do not represent that, then we do not represent God in the world. Harsh statement, but it's very true. Is it hard to do? Sure, it's hard to do. Come on, man. If it was easy to do, everyone would do it, right? But one thing I love about God is that everything that we're asked to do and be is hard. It's not easy. But it's very powerful, very moving, life-giving. It's really something else. And that is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, is this ability to reconcile relationships. And there's a lot of things that it is reconciliation, is not. But the most part is our effort to put forth, to go to people we have hurt or have hurt us and try to make things right. And the day that that happens, a burden and a box gets thrown into the furnace and off of our shoulders and out of our hearts, and it's one step closer to being the person that God really needs to be. And I get a lot of great pleasure of working with people who are on that part of their life that they're trying to improve their faith and trying to reconcile relationships. But unfortunately, the most busy time I am to do that is just before they die. Because we just keep putting it off until that moment where there's nothing else for us to do, right? And we're faced with it. We have so much guilt that we don't know what to do with it. That's a hard part. I want to introduce to you a person that you have known before. This is my father and my stepmom. My dad has always been kind of that's where I get my shape of my head from. But my father's always been a guy, it's always been the topic of my sermons. We've had a really difficult time growing up, but when started to get into more of the adult years, we really tied things in together, and he became one of my greatest heroes. And we developed a really strong relationship. This picture was taken, I took this picture at MD Anderson. We're in the doctor's room. He had this great doctor he's had for like 17 years, 20 years actually. And this was our last visit because he was doing all these things, having some issues, and he comes back, the doctor says, Elton, we pretty much did everything we can. It's time to go. This is it. Get ready. And you can see the look on my stepmom's face. It's pretty heavy news. And she's thinking to herself, The hell's this? Strong stuff. Those moments happen. And I guarantee you, it's going to happen to all of us. I bring this up because before this event happened, maybe about the year before, I went down there and visited with them for a while, a few days, and I interviewed them. Wanted to interview them so I can get this out to my kids and grandchildren. Children? I'm already starting, aren't I? So I want them to know who their granddaddy is. And so for 3 days I interviewed him, probably about 45 minutes to an hour at a time. That's all he could take. And it was the best time we ever had because we talked about all the stuff. From the day he was born to that moment where he was sitting in that chair, even to that day that in his chair, what he hopes for the future. And it's a very neat interview, and it was really powerful. And so one of the things that we talked about was I asked him about his past, about things that he regretted, things that he wished he had not done, people he needed to forgive in his life. And he was pretty honest about a lot of things, and he says, well, there's some things that I don't want to tell you. We're all there, folks, aren't we? There's just some things in our lives that we don't want anybody to know because we have messed up so much, or we're so shameful of what we have done. They just carried them with them. And so we went through this process, this interview, and it turned out to be something that was very special to me. And then the day that this day happened, we were driving home. Stepmom was driving, I'm on the passenger side, Dad's in the back. And we're all just kind of being quiet, thinking, all right, what's next? Heard this voice from the back seat say, Danny, I'm going to need some help. I want to be able to die the right way. I said, Dad, I'm your huckleberry. We can do that. So I said, the first thing you need to do, Dad, is you need to make a list of all the people that you just have impacted your life so much that you just want to be there with you. Write down their names. Give them a call. Say, hey, come visit me. And then you're going to sit there with them and you're going to tell them how much they mean to you and how thankful you are for life. And then I want you to make another list of all those people in your life that you feel like you need to forgive, that you have done wrong or have wronged you, that you're in a rocky relationship with. And he says, well, I've done a pretty good job of that, of reconciling people, except for one person. And that was my brother David, 4 years older than me. I said, Dad, you make your calls, your buddies and your family, and you get them there, and then I'll take care of David. And so I went home and talked to David and said, hey, we got to make a trip down to see Dad. This is what's happening. He doesn't have long to go. We need to make that happen. He said, I'm not doing it. I don't want to see him that way. I don't want to talk to him. So after a while, trying to convince him to make that trip, he finally said, okay, I'll give it a shot. But he kept putting it off. You know how that goes, right? I may make this happen, but I'll do it tomorrow. I'm busy. So we move on, and it's getting close to Labor Day, and I called him up again. I said, Dad wants you there. He wants to visit with you. You know, I'm busy. I got to work. I said, David, do it for me, please. And so he did. So we went down there Labor Day. And Labor Day ended on that Monday. I think it was the 6th or the 7th. And he comes home, and he's so excited. He says, I don't know what's wrong with those medicines they give Dad because he had so much energy. And if you know anything about people who are about to die through this process, they're down. Some God gives them this gift of energy. And it's kind of like, feels like it's fool's gold. Like, oh, they're better. So he comes home, he's all excited. Dad's going to be better. We just get him off that stupid medicine. What do those doctors know, right? How many times I said that? And so we'd say that, okay, then I said, hey, he's doing great. Everything went great. They had the best time they ever had. And that was on the 7th. On the 11th, my father died. He went out the right way. He reconciled all those broken relationships that he had, that he needed to be said, the things he needed to say. He gave thanks to people he needed to say some things to. It was a thing of beauty. It was a perfect ending to a life. And we say a perfect life, because a perfect life is not perfect like we think it is. It's a life that does the things it needs to do to make things right with others. Very powerful words. Because we all reach that point in our lives where we have to learn the power of reconciliation, of making things right with others. And that's what this card represents. Is I want us to participate in it, because you have that opportunity to do that. But I don't want you to wait until the end of your life. I want you to think about doing it now. To release all that anger, all that resentment, all of that frustration, all that unforgiveness that you keep in you, and it makes you into the person that you don't want to be. You need to free yourself from all that is destroying you from the inside and making you the person that you do not want to be. It kind of has to start with this. So in this envelope, there's a little card in it. So what you do is I want you to write people on that card, with a pencil too. I want you to write the people in your life that you need to forgive, or people in your life that you need to seek forgiveness from. It doesn't have to be anything major. It can be something very simple. Like, well, I'm asking someone to forgive you. I was mad at you. I said some harsh things about you to other people. You need to know about it, but I'm sorry. I need your forgiveness from that. It could be something as simple as that. But all these things that just add up and they build up in us until we actually become something that we're not. And we hold on to that resentment and that anger. And it really does have an effect on our personality and everything else that we try to do. So I want you to take some time to do that. And there's another concept that I want you to try. These are called cookies. These are actually called forgiveness cookies. You heard of these? Joanne went to do some prison ministry, and they have this concept they call forgiveness cookies. And they pass these out to the inmates. And then the inmates find people that they need to forgive. You can imagine there's probably a lot of them. And they give them to other inmates. It's a form of trying to say, will you forgive me? It's a nice gesture. It's also a good way just to kind of start the concept. You know, hey, I'm sorry for what I did. We take this. They're not laced with anything. You can take them. It's peanut butter. I know you're allergic to peanuts. We don't want to go that route. But what we want to do is we want to just have a gesture, a kind gesture to somebody that you've been at odds with. I want to make things right. Here is something that I can give you and share with you as a way of saying I'm sorry. As simple as that. Go through the process. Don't go to the store and buy the $3 kind cookies. Make some cookies. Put some effort into it. And I'm going to let you watch a video on that because there's a lot of power in forgiveness. And I want you to watch this inmate that has been given this part of these forgiveness cookies to share. He has been incarcerated since 1987, if you can imagine. And so here he is talking about those experiences that he's had that has really changed his life. And while this is going on, write some names on that card if you can, and we'll talk about it when we get done.
What do you do with all those cookies on a Kairos? I usually give mine away. I usually give my Kairos cookies away. I don't go without, as you can see. I think you hear most of the guys that aren't believers down the hallway, they call them Jesus cookies. When are we getting the Jesus cookies? And that's an awesome thing. A non-believer looking and excited about getting something from Jesus. And that's what it's all about anyways. So that's what I do. I give mine away. To get blessings, you got to be a blessing. And that's what I try and do. On the weekend, they give you forgiveness cookies. And when I went through my weekend, it was a time in my life, there was a teetering. There was a lot of stuff going on. I was in a very dark place, and I was part of a group, and this group expected me to do some stuff, and it was going to happen after my weekend. And actually during my weekend, they give you a brown bag of cookies, and they tell you, listen, give this to the person that you have to give the most forgiveness to. And the person that I was supposed to do something to, I sent that bag of cookies to him. And he had just went through a weekend, so he knew what that bag of cookies meant. So in my weekend, it not only saved my life, but it possibly saved somebody else's life with those forgiveness cookies. Because in me giving those forgiveness cookies, that relationship with that guy was rectified, was reconciled, and those cookies, in many cases, and I'm not saying in all of them, but in many cases, they save lives.
This is serious stuff, folks. We are people of reconciliation, and the only thing that keeps us from reconciling might be our pride or whatever it might be, or anger or resentment. It's time to move past that and try to do something that can really identify and show people who God is by the way that we share our lives with other people and the way that we care about people and try to forgive people and be forgiven of those broken relationships. And time to move past that. So take some time to do that. In a minute, we're going to share communion. And I don't want everyone just to jump up and get in line to take communion. I want you to sit there in your chairs, and I want you to think about it. And when you are ready to take communion, then I want you to come forward. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. Just care about what you're doing on that. And, you know, the nice thing about the New Testament, we have this 2 books in there, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. If you know anything about the church in Corinth, oh, man, they were Jerry Springer on steroids church. If you want to really feel good about yourself, read that and what they're going through. I mean, it's pretty crazy, some of the stuff they're doing there. But one of the things that they would try to do is that they would try to have communion together as a church. And they would do it around a meal. And so they'd have this big meal, then people come and they'd have a meal. And through that meal, then the process of breaking bread and drinking wine started happening. Well, you know how people are. Some people are going to be late. And so we got to wait for everybody to get there. So what are we going to do in the meantime? Well, let's just see how many bottles of wine we can partake in, right? And so they get kind of snockered a little bit. And so then they started getting in fights and getting in conflict. And all of a sudden, the Jerry Springer show is taking place here in an act of worship. And so then what happens then is that Paul is trying to get these folks to say, look, you know, you're worrying about stuff that doesn't matter. So I want you to do is when you get together, and before you even break bread, I want you to think about those people in this room at that table that you have a broken relationship with. And I want you to mend that fence before you come forward and you share something so profound, so sacred, so intentional as the forgiveness, love, and cup of Christ. Take this stuff seriously. Take it to heart because it really does matter in relationships around you, but also where we go as a congregation, as a people of God, and where this kingdom goes in this community. So take some time to think about that, and when you are ready and no one else, then come forward and partake of what has been given to you. So let us pray. Lord, you ask us to do things that don't seem natural to us, except, of course, when we were children. We knew how to love at one point endlessly. But somewhere in the course of life, we tend to get things real complicated, and we get very confused, and we hold on to things that we need to let go. And so we gather in this place, and we hear these words that your Son, who continues to tell us, give me all your stuff, so that you can focus on the things that matter and help those who live without hope, because we need to be a people of hope. And so we're doing just that, Lord. We're trying to take our lives and our church and in your faith to a whole new level, that we can create a safe environment for this whole community to come and together to celebrate who they are as your children. Help us with that vision. But we know we cannot be that place unless we first look inward and work on those things that tend to be stumbling blocks for our lives. Help us, God, to reach out to you, to throw our boxes at your feet, to take those names on our list and ask for forgiveness, that we can seek that. And as we gather these names and our cards and our lists, may we put them in these envelopes, and before we come to you, to your table, we drop them in the basket. We give them to you so that you can help us to become a people of reconciliation. Guide us this day in our efforts, we pray.